Blood dripped from the leather bindings around her wrists, mixing with the red Wyoming dust. Eli Ward had seen plenty of death in his 45 years. He'd seen it on Civil War battlefields, seen it on long cattle drives, seen it in the bottom of a whiskey glass in a smoky saloon. But he had never seen anything like this. Under the shade of an old willow tree by Crow Creek, an Apache woman had been beaten and left to die. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Her dark hair, thick as a raven's wing, was spilled across her bronze shoulders. And even unconscious, with her body broken and bleeding, there was something fierce about her. Something that reminded Eli of a wild Mustang he'd once seen, beautiful and utterly unbroken. The smart thing to do was to ride away, to turn his horse, Thunder, around, and pretend he'd seen nothing. Tribal justice wasn't his business. Getting involved was a good way to end up with a knife in your back or a bullet in your chest. But as he knelt beside her, his rough fingers searching for a pulse at her slender throat, he felt a faint, thready beat. The stubborn drum of a life that refused to be silenced. And in that moment, Eli Ward knew he was about to break every rule the Wyoming Territory had about minding your own business. Because sometimes a man has to choose between what's easy and what's right. September 1878. The Double-A Ranch was a lonely speck 30 miles from Cheyenne, a place where the prairie stretched out forever under a sky so big it could make a man feel like a king one minute and an ant the next. Eli had chosen this isolation on purpose. He'd chosen it after he buried his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children. 3 long winters ago, the influenza had swept through Wyoming like a phantom army, and it had taken everything from him. Out here, the only sounds were the wind whispering through the tall buffalo grass and the lowing of his 200 head of cattle. Out here, he could almost convince himself that the constant ache in his chest was just the high altitude and not the hollow, empty space where his family used to be. He was checking a fence line near Crow Creek when he saw it, a splash of bright color against the red earth that simply didn't belong. His stallion Thunder snorted and danced sideways, the animal's instincts screaming that something was wrong. Eli slid his Winchester from its leather scabbard, his eyes scanning the horizon. He dismounted, moving low and quiet, the way the army had taught him. She lay crumpled beneath the ancient willow. Her hands were bound tight with rawhide, her buckskin dress torn and stained dark with blood. Apache, he could tell from the intricate turquoise beadwork on her moccasins and the tarnished silver bracelets that caught the dying afternoon sun. Someone had worked her over good with a quirt, a short, cruel whip, leaving angry, raised welts across her back and arms. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Even bruised and marked by suffering, she was beautiful in a way that stole the air from his lungs. High cheekbones, a full mouth, lips slightly parted as she fought for breath. Her skin was the color of polished copper. She couldn't be more than 22, maybe 23. Far too young to be left for dead. Eli had learned a little of the Apache language and their ways during his time in the cavalry. He recognized the faint smell of sage smoke clinging to her hair, the scent of herbs used in their purification ceremonies. This wasn't some random act of violence by outlaws. This was something else. This was tribal punishment. His practical mind began to catalog the dangers. Apache war parties still raided through this territory. The army was cracking down hard on everyone after the disaster at Little Bighorn. Getting involved could mean a swift death for both of them. It was suicide. But then, as he watched her struggle for each tiny breath, he heard Sarah's voice in his memory as clear as if she were standing right beside him. A man's character isn't measured by what he does when people are watching, Eli. It's measured by what he does when no one is. "Ah, hell," he muttered to the wind, holstering his rifle. He took out his knife, its blade sharp and clean, and carefully sliced through the rawhide bindings. He tried not to damage the torn, raw skin beneath. When he gathered her into his arms to lift her, he was surprised by how light she was, like a bird. He was surprised by how perfectly her body fit against his chest. And then, her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of dark amber, of old whiskey held up to a flame. And they were filled with a pride so fierce, so untamed, that even in her broken state, it made something long dormant stir deep in his gut. "Easy now," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "You're safe." She tried to speak, but only a dry, rasping croak came out. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. She tried to push away from him, a last, defiant act of a cornered animal, but her strength failed completely. She went limp in his arms, her head falling against his shoulder. The ride back to the ranch was a different kind of torture. She was barely conscious, her body a dead weight against his. Every single step Thunder took pressed her soft curves more intimately against Eli's chest and thighs. The scent of her, sage and leather and something uniquely, intoxicatingly female, filled his nostrils. It had been 3 long, lonely years since he'd held a woman. His body, to his shame, responded to her closeness, despite the circumstances, despite the fact that she was half dead. By the time they reached his small, rough-hewn cabin, the sun was a fiery ball sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky the same red-gold color as her skin. Eli's cabin was simple but clean. 2 rooms, a big stone fireplace, and walls lined with the books Sarah had insisted on bringing west with them. He laid the Apache woman down on his own bed, the one he hadn't shared since Sarah's passing. He heated water on the stove and gathered clean cloths to tend to her wounds. As he began to gently wash the blood from her back, he tried to be professional, detached. He tried not to notice the elegant, graceful curve of her spine. He tried to ignore the way her breathing made the delicate cage of her ribs rise and fall beneath her translucent skin. He was a man helping an injured person. Nothing more. But when she suddenly jerked awake, rolling away from him with a speed that seemed impossible, all clinical detachment vanished in a heartbeat, because a knife had appeared in her hand, as if by magic. "Stay back," she snarled. The words were English, spoken with an accent, but they were crystal clear, and the point of that knife was aimed directly at his heart. Eli froze, the water bowl still balanced in one hand. He slowly raised his palms in a gesture of peace. "Easy. I'm not going to hurt you." "You are Bilagana," she spat, the word for white man sounding like a curse. "You think you own everything you touch." Her amber eyes blazed with a firestorm of hatred and pain. "I think," Eli said slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady, "that you were dying by that creek. And now you're not. Everything else we can figure out later." She studied his face for a long, tense moment. The knife remained steady in her grip, a testament to her will, even as her body trembled with weakness. Whatever she saw in his weathered face, in the tired lines around his green eyes, it made her lower the blade, just slightly. "Why?" she whispered, the single word full of suspicion. Eli gave her the only honest answer he had. "Because leaving you there to die would have made me less of a man than I want to be." For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the small, quiet room. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In its golden glow, her beauty was even more striking. Those sharp cheekbones, that full mouth, those eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets and 1,000 sorrows. Her torn buckskin dress had slipped off one shoulder, revealing the soft, perfect swell of her breast. Eli had to force himself to look away, his throat suddenly dry. "I am Ayana," she said finally, her voice still rough. "It means flower that blooms forever." She paused, and her voice broke on the next words. "But they said I could no longer carry that name, that I had dishonored it." What was your crime? Eli asked, sitting down slowly in the worn wooden chair by the bed. Must be something pretty terrible to deserve what they did to you. Her laugh was a bitter, broken sound. I refused to marry the man my uncle chose for me. His name is Bedzil. He already has 2 wives. He beats them. She met his eyes, and the defiant fire was back. I said no. Among my people, this is rebellion. Eli felt something shift inside his chest. It was a hot surge of anger at the men who had hurt her, but it was also something else. It was a flicker of recognition. Here was another soul who'd been punished simply for choosing their own path. Well, he said carefully, in my house, a woman's no means no, and you can call yourself whatever name feels right to you. She was quiet for a moment, considering his words. Anna, she said, her voice softer now. I learned it at the missionary school, a long time ago. It means grace. Anna, it is then, he said with a small nod. He gestured to the bowl of warm water and the clean cloths. Will you let me clean these wounds now? They'll fester if we don't tend to them proper. This time, when he touched her, she didn't pull away. His calloused, work-roughened fingers were surprisingly gentle as they cleaned each cut, each angry welt. He tried to ignore the way she shivered when the cloth traced the elegant line of her collarbone. He tried to ignore the soft gasp she made when he reached a particularly tender spot near her hip. He told himself it was just pain. You have done this before, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't a question. It was a statement. Doctoring. The war teaches a man things, he replied, his voice low. Not all of them are about killing. As he worked, he could feel her eyes on him. She was studying his face. The weathered lines etched by sun and sorrow, the flecks of gray threading through his dark brown hair, the quiet competence in his every movement. He knew this was not what she had expected from a white rancher. There was a kindness in him, she was discovering, and a deep, quiet pain that seemed to match her own. You had a woman, Anna said, her gaze drifting around the small, tidy cabin. She noticed the little things, the faded calico curtains on the window, the small clay jar on the mantel with a few dried wildflowers in it. Where is she? Eli's hand stilled for a fraction of a second. Buried, he said, his voice flat. On the hill behind the house, her and our 2 children, the influenza, 3 winters past. I am sorry, she whispered, and he could tell she truly was. She could hear the raw, unhealed grief in his voice, see it in the way his broad shoulders suddenly seemed to sag. That is why you live alone, she stated. Seems safer that way, he admitted, his voice rough. Can't lose what you don't have. Anna reached out then, almost without thinking, and her cool fingers touched his cheek. The sudden, unexpected intimacy of the gesture surprised them both. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Neither of them pulled away. Sometimes, she said softly, her amber eyes searching his, the safety we choose becomes its own kind of prison. Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow because they were the truest words anyone had spoken to him in 3 years. But out on the prairie, safety was an illusion, and their small, quiet prison was about to be discovered. That night, as a storm rolled in across the plains, Eli was startled awake by a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the wind or the rain. It was the soft, unmistakable whinny of a horse just outside his cabin. A horse that wasn't his. In the days that followed, Anna began to heal. And as her body mended, Eli discovered she was far more than just a beautiful, broken woman. She had skills that left him in awe. She could handle his horses with a gentle confidence, as if she'd been born in a saddle. She knew the land intimately, pointing out which plants could heal a fever and which ones could kill a man. She could track a deer across ground that looked completely empty to Eli's eyes. She also had a pride that ran as deep as the bedrock beneath the prairie. The moment she was strong enough to walk without stumbling, she insisted on earning her keep. Eli would find her mending his tack with a skill he'd never seen, grinding corn for flour, or tending to his small, struggling vegetable garden with an expertise that made his own clumsy efforts look foolish. "You don't owe me anything, Anna," he told her one morning. He was watching her repair a bridle, her slender fingers weaving intricate beadwork into the plain leather, transforming it into a piece of art. "I owe myself," she replied without looking up from her work. "I will not be a burden to any man ever again." But it wasn't her skills or her pride that began to slowly, inexorably undo him. It was the small, quiet moments. It was the way she would hum while she worked, soft, haunting Apache melodies that made his chest feel tight. It was the way she would stand on the porch at sunset, the wind pressing her simple skirt against the long, graceful curves of her hips and thighs as she watched the sky burn itself out in a blaze of gold and crimson. It was the unconscious elegance in her every movement, from the gentle sway of her walk to the mesmerizing way she would braid her long, shining black hair each morning. 3 weeks after he'd found her, she caught him staring. She was hanging his laundry on the line he'd strung between two posts, and he was leaning against the barn, just watching her. Their eyes met across the dusty yard, and in that instant, something electric, something undeniable, passed between them. It was a silent acknowledgement of the powerful current of desire they had both been so carefully, so deliberately, pretending didn't exist. That evening, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken tension. She had prepared a rabbit stew, seasoned with wild sage and roots she had gathered from the creek bed. They ate in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the clinking of their spoons against the tin bowls. Then she spoke. "Tell me about her." "Your woman." Eli set down his spoon, surprised by the question. "Why?" "Because she still lives in this house," Anna said softly. "I see her in the way you fold the blankets. I see her in the way you set the table for two, even when you were alone." He looked down at his hands, then into the fire. "Her name was Sarah," he began, his voice rough with memory. "She was gentle. Sarah was sunshine in human form. She believed there was good in everyone." He managed a small, sad smile. "She would have liked you. She always said that strength and kindness weren't opposites. They were just different ways of caring." Anna watched him over the rim of her cup, her amber eyes seeming to see right through him. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you see kindness in me, Eli Ward?" The question hung in the air like smoke. When Eli looked at her, really looked at her, he didn't just see the beautiful woman who stirred his body. He saw a woman who had survived betrayal and unimaginable violence. He saw a woman who worked harder than any man he knew. A woman who could gentle a wild horse with a whispered word and kill a rattlesnake with a single, perfectly thrown rock. "I see someone who chooses to heal rather than harm," he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Despite having every reason in the world to hate it. A log in the fireplace popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Anna rose from the table and moved to stand before the fire, her silhouette outlined in shimmering gold. And then she began to pull the pins from her hair. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The dark, heavy mass of it tumbled over her shoulders and down her back like a midnight waterfall. She shook it out with an unconscious, devastating sensuality. "In my tribe," she said, her back still to him, her voice low and hypnotic. "A woman's hair is her power, it is her spirit. Only her husband is permitted to see it unbound." She turned then, and her amber eyes, glowing in the firelight, held his steadily. "But I am no longer of that tribe, and you have shown me what respect looks like, what true strength is." The air between them crackled. It was so thick with unspoken want, with years of loneliness, that Eli felt he could barely breathe. He stood up slowly, every muscle in his body taut, acutely aware of her nearness, of the warmth radiating from her skin, of the way the firelight played across the delicate hollow of her throat. "Anna," he managed to say, his voice coming out as a rough rasp. She took a step closer, then another. She was so close now that he could smell the faint, clean scent of sage in her hair. He could see the tiny pulse beating at her temple. "Do you want me to leave, Eli Ward?" she asked softly. "God, no." The words tore from him, raw and honest. "But I won't take advantage of you." She silenced him by pressing a single, soft finger to his lips. Her eyes held a mischievous glint he hadn't seen before. "What if," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin, "I'm the one who wants to take?" And then she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. But when he responded, a low groan rumbling deep in his chest as he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her tight against him, she came alive in his arms. Her mouth opened under his, and suddenly they were devouring each other with the desperate, starving hunger of two people who had been alone for far, far too long. His hands tangled in the glorious, heavy silk of her hair, while hers explored the solid breadth of his shoulders, his back, pulling him closer still. She was all soft curves and warm, yielding skin. And when she pressed herself against him, aligning their bodies so perfectly it felt like they were two halves of a whole finally coming together, Eli thought he might actually lose his mind. "Anna," he gasped against the soft skin of her throat. Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she began to unbutton his shirt, her fingers nimble and swift. When she pushed the rough fabric aside and pressed her warm lips to his chest, right over his frantically racing heart, Eli's last shred of control shattered into a million pieces. He swept her up into his arms and carried her to his bed, laying her down on the worn quilt as if she were the most precious, most fragile thing in the world. In the flickering lamplight, her skin was golden, her body was beautiful, and her eyes watched him with no fear, no hesitation, only want. A want that mirrored the inferno raging inside him. What happened next was slow and sweet and desperate all at once. Years of loneliness and grief melted away as they came together, two damaged, broken souls finding a powerful, profound healing in each other's touch. Anna was generous and demanding by turns, teaching him that passion could be tender, that desire could be sacred. She awoke a part of him he thought had died with Sarah. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head resting on his chest, his fingers idly, wonderingly, threading through her magnificent hair. The storm outside had passed, and the only sound was their soft breathing in the quiet darkness. "I never thought," Eli murmured into the darkness, his voice thick. "I never thought I could feel this way again." Anna lifted her head to look at him, her face close to his. And in her beautiful amber eyes he saw his own sense of wonder reflected back at him. "Nor I," she whispered. "But perhaps some things are worth the risk of feeling." But their newfound peace was fragile, a delicate bubble in a world full of sharp edges. The very next afternoon, while Eli was showing Anna how to properly sight his Winchester, a rider appeared on the distant ridge. He sat on his horse, a dark silhouette against the bright blue sky, just watching them. He was too far away to make out any details, but Eli felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. They were no longer alone. And then the rider did something that made the blood run cold in Eli's veins. He raised a hand, and in it, glinting in the harsh sunlight, was a small, round mirror. He flashed it twice towards the east, a signal. He wasn't a scout. He was a spotter. And he was telling the rest of his party that he had found what they were looking for. 3 weeks of fragile, precious bliss, came to an abrupt and violent end with the sound of unshod horses approaching the ranch. It was dawn, the sky just beginning to turn a pale, washed-out gray. Anna heard them first. Her head snapped up from where she'd been grinding coffee beans, her body instantly tense, like a deer catching the scent of a wolf on the wind. "Apache," she said, the single word flat and heavy with dread. The joy that had illuminated her face for the past few weeks vanished, replaced by a mask of grim resignation. Eli was already moving, grabbing his Winchester from its place over the mantel. He counted 5 riders cresting the small hill to the east of his cabin. They were warriors, their faces streaked with paint, their hair adorned with feathers. They carried traditional weapons, lances and war clubs, but 2 of them also had modern Army-issue rifles slung across their backs. At their head rode an older man. His face was a road map of wrinkles and scars, his bearing straight and proud. Even from a distance, he radiated an aura of authority and profound grief. "My uncle," Anna whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Nal Nish. He is the war leader of our band." They reined in their horses at the edge of Eli's property line, a deliberate, calculated gesture. It was both a show of respect for his claim and a clear, unspoken warning. Nal Nish rode forward alone, his expression as stern and unyielding as the winter stone of the mountains. "I seek the one who was called Ayana," he said, his accented English carrying easily in the still morning air. "I am here, Uncle," Anna said. She stepped out onto the porch, and Eli saw her transform. In an instant, she was no longer the soft, laughing Anna of the past few weeks. She was Ayana again, the proud Apache woman she had been raised to be. But she stayed close to his side, her shoulder brushing his, a subtle act of claiming that was not lost on the old warrior. "You dishonor yourself, child." Nal Nish's voice was heavy, not with anger but with a deep, crushing disappointment. "And you dishonor us. This man, this Bilagana, he has bewitched you. He has made you forget who you are." "He has reminded me who I choose to be," Anna replied, her voice clear and strong. "I am free, Uncle. For the first time in my life, I am free." "Freedom!" Nal Nish's laugh was a harsh, bitter bark. "You trade your people, your blood, your spirits, for what? The bed of a white man. His ancestors were the ones who killed your father at the Little Bighorn." The words hit Anna like a physical blow. Eli felt her flinch beside him, but she did not look away from her uncle's piercing gaze. "My father died fighting for our people's right to choose their own path," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I honor him by choosing mine." Eli had remained silent until now, letting Anna fight her own battle, but he could not stay quiet any longer. He stepped forward, standing slightly in front of her, a protective gesture he didn't even think about. "Sir," he said, his voice respectful but unwavering, "your niece came to me near death. I gave her shelter and I helped her heal. Nothing more was asked or expected." "Yet you take her as your woman," Nal Nish shot back, his dark eyes narrowed. "You make her into something she is not. You turn her against her own blood." "I love her," Eli said, the words simple, direct, and utterly true. "And she chooses to stay here with me." The admission hung in the cold autumn air, a stark and dangerous declaration. Nal Nish stared at them for a long time, his gaze shifting from the grizzled white rancher to the woman who had once been his beloved brother's only daughter. "Love," he spat the word as if it were poison. "You know nothing of love, Bilagana. Love is sacrifice. Love is duty to your people. Love is honoring the traditions of those who came before you and preserving them for those who will come after." He turned his full attention back to Anna, his voice softening slightly. "Come home, child. The council has agreed. If you renounce this madness, you may return. You will be given to Bedzil, as was planned. He has given his word that he will not beat you, if you are compliant." Anna's face went bone white. "Bedzil killed his last wife, Uncle," she whispered, her voice laced with horror. "Everyone knows it. He claimed she fell from a horse, but she had bruises on her for weeks." "She was weak," Nalnish said, his voice hardening again. "You are strong. You will survive." "Surviving isn't living." Anna's voice grew stronger, fueled by a sudden surge of righteous anger. "Here, with this man, I have learned the difference." Nalnish's expression turned to granite. "Then you choose exile. You choose to be dead to us. Your name will be struck from the memory of our people." "If that is the price of freedom," Anna said steadily, lifting her chin, "then yes, I choose it." The old warrior dismounted from his horse. For a terrifying moment, Eli thought he was going to attack them, but instead, Nalnish pulled a long, sharp knife from the sheath on his belt. It was not a gesture of threat, but one of grim ceremony. He walked towards Anna, his eyes filled with a terrible sorrow. He reached out and with a single, swift motion, cut a thick lock of her beautiful black hair, letting it fall to the dust at her feet. "The daughter of my brother is dead," he intoned, his voice deep and formal, like a shaman chanting a death rite. "The woman who carries her face is nothing to us now." It was a cruel, devastating ritual, and Eli saw how it cut Anna deeper than any physical whip ever could. But she bore it with a stoic, heartbreaking dignity, her eyes never leaving her uncle's face. "However," Nalnish continued, and something in his tone shifted, became more complex, more cunning. "If this Bilagana can prove himself worthy, if he can show that he truly values what he claims to love, perhaps the woman who is dead to us might yet find a place between the worlds." "What kind of proof?" Eli asked, his hand tightening on the stock of his rifle. "Combat," Nalnish said, his eyes glinting. "Tomorrow at dawn. You against our strongest warrior, Chaitin. If you win, we will acknowledge your claim. We will leave you in peace. If you lose—" He shrugged, a gesture more eloquent than any words. "The woman returns with us to face judgment for her crimes against our people." "And if I refuse?" Eli asked, his mind racing. "Then we take her now," Nalnish said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "and you die for harboring a fugitive." He gestured to the 4 warriors behind him, who now held their rifles at the ready. Eli looked at Anna. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also a sad resignation. She expected him to choose his own safety. She expected him to let her go rather than risk his life. After all, what was she to him? A woman he had known for less than 2 months. A beautiful complication. But as he looked at her, at this fierce, proud, incredible woman who had somehow managed to bring light and laughter back into his dark, empty world, he knew there was no choice to be made. There was only one path forward. "Dawn it is," he said, his voice ringing with a certainty that surprised even himself. That night, the cabin felt like a tomb. Anna pleaded with him, begged him to run. "You don't understand, Eli," she said, pacing back and forth in their small bedroom, like a caged mountain lion. "Chaitin is not just a warrior. He is a killer. He has killed 7 men in single combat. He enjoys it." "Then I'll be the 8th," Eli replied calmly. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, meticulously cleaning his Colt, .45, the familiar, methodical movements soothing his frayed nerves. "This isn't a joke!" She grabbed his hands, forcing him to stop, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were wide with fear. "I am not worth dying for." Eli set aside the pistol and gently cupped her face in his large, calloused palms. He looked deep into her eyes. "That's where you're wrong, Anna," he said, his voice soft but filled with an unshakable conviction. "You're worth everything." They made love that night with a desperate, frantic intensity. as if they could somehow imprint themselves on each other's souls, as if the sheer force of their passion could hold the coming dawn at bay. Anna wept silently as she rode him, her hot tears falling onto his chest like a sad, hopeless rain. They both knew with a bone-deep certainty that it might be their last time together. Dawn came, as it always does, indifferent to the hopes and fears of men. It was a gray, cold morning, with a thick mist rising off Crow Creek like departing ghosts. The Apache had made their camp nearby, and they gathered in a solemn circle, their painted faces grim in the pale light. Chayton was everything Anna had described, and more. He was a giant of a man, tall and powerfully built, his bare chest and arms covered in a tapestry of scars that spoke of countless battles. He carried a heavy war club, its head studded with sharpened iron spikes. His eyes, small and black and buried in his impassive face, held no mercy, no pity, only a cold, brutal purpose. Nalnish stepped into the center of the circle to announce the terms. "Hand-to-hand combat," he declared, his voice echoing in the morning stillness. "The fight continues until one man yields or until one man dies. No weapons are permitted, save for the strength a man carries in his heart and the courage he holds in his soul." Eli stripped to the waist, his pale, scarred skin a stark contrast to the bronze of the Apache warriors surrounding him. He was older than Chayton and smaller, but 3 years of hard ranch work had kept him lean and corded with muscle, and his green eyes held the steady, unnerving calm of a man who had already lost everything once and so had nothing left to fear. The fight was brutal and swift. Chayton came at him like a charging grizzly, all explosive speed and savage grace. The heavy war club whistled through the air, missing Eli's head by a mere inch. The rancher rolled away, coming up with a mouthful of dust and murder in his eyes. They circled each other, Chayton grinning a predator's grin, Eli's face a grim, unreadable mask. When the Apache lunged again, Eli was ready. He sidestepped the clumsy swing of the club and, using the warrior's own momentum against him, caught his wrist and twisted. With a sharp, powerful movement, he drove his knee hard into Chayton's ribs. The sickening crack of breaking bone echoed across the silent prairie. But Chayton was far from finished. He roared in pain and fury, switched the club to his other hand, and swung in a vicious, backhanded arc that caught Eli across the shoulders, dropping him to his knees. White-hot pain exploded in Eli's back. Anna screamed his name, a raw, desperate cry that was cut short by one of the other warriors. "Stay down, Billagana," Chayton panted, looming over him, the club raised for a final killing blow. "Die with some honor." Instead of cowering, Eli looked up and smiled, a bloody, terrifying grin. "Not today, friend." He exploded upward from his kneeling position, a coiled spring of unexpected violence. He drove his fist straight into Chayton's throat. The big warrior stumbled backward, gagging, his eyes wide with shock. Eli didn't give him a second to recover. He followed up with a brutal, lightning-fast combination that would have made his old army boxing instructor proud. A left hook to the already broken ribs, a right cross to the jaw that snapped Chayton's head back, and another vicious left that sent the war club flying from his grasp. Suddenly it was just 2 men, trading raw, desperate punches under the vast, indifferent Wyoming sky. They fought until their faces were bloody, unrecognizable masks, until their knuckles were raw and split open, until sheer exhaustion made each blow feel like lifting a mountain. In the end, it was not strength or youth that won the day. It was experience. Chayton was a powerful warrior, but Eli had fought in a war. He had seen more death, survived more loss. He knew how to endure. He knew how to win. When the Apache champion finally dropped to his knees, his massive chest heaving, unable to rise again, Eli stood over him, not with triumph, but with a quiet, weary dignity. "Yield," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. Chayton looked up at him, then over at his chief Nalnish, then back at the battered, bloody white man who had bested him fairly. "I yield," he gasped. A heavy silence fell over the circle. Nalnish stepped forward, his face unreadable. He looked at Eli, then at Chayton, and then at Anna. He had given his word. But as he opened his mouth to speak, a new voice cut through the morning air. "This changes nothing." Every head turned. A warrior had separated from the group, stepping into the circle. He was younger than Nalnish, with a cruel, handsome face and eyes that glittered with ambition. It was Bedzil, the man Anna had refused to marry. "The white man won a fist fight," Bedzil sneered, a contemptuous smile twisting his lips. "He proved he is a strong animal, but the woman is still a traitor. She stole from the people. She must be punished." "She stole nothing," Eli growled, taking a threatening step towards Bedzil. "She stole a sacred trust," Bedzil retorted, his voice rising, playing to the crowd of warriors. "She was entrusted with the Winter Count map, the sacred history of our people, passed down from her father. And she took it with her when she fled. She meant to sell it to the white men." A murmur of shock and anger went through the Apache warriors. This was a crime far worse than refusing a marriage. It was a betrayal of their very soul. Nalnish looked at Anna, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of pain and confusion. "Is this true, child? Did you take the map?" Anna looked at her uncle, then at the hateful face of Bedzil, and finally at Eli. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a strength that stunned them all. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing out clear and true. "I took the map. I took it to protect it from him." She pointed a trembling finger directly at Bedzil. "He is the one who planned to sell it. He made a deal with prospectors from Cheyenne. He was going to trade the location of our sacred silver mine, a secret known only to the map keeper, for $1,000 in gold." The clearing exploded into chaos. 6 months later, Anna stood on the porch of their ranch house. One hand rested on the gentle, protective swell of her belly. She watched Eli drive their growing herd of cattle across the lush spring grass. The child, their child, would come with the summer. Sometimes she could feel its tiny movements inside her, like the flutter of butterfly wings against her ribs. She wore a simple calico dress, the kind the white women wore in Cheyenne. Her hair was braided down her back, another concession to her new world. But on her wrists, glinting in the bright sunlight, were the silver Apache bracelets she would never take off. She was living between worlds just as her uncle had predicted. But she had learned that between was not an empty space. It could be a place of its own, a place of belonging. The chaos that had erupted after her accusation had been swift and decisive. Bedzil had denied everything, of course, his face a mask of outrage. But Anna had been smarter than he gave her credit for. She had not brought the sacred map with her. Before she fled, she had entrusted it to an old medicine woman, one of the few people in the tribe she knew she could trust, along with a message explaining Bedzil's treachery. Faced with Anna's accusation, the medicine woman had come forward. She produced the map, and she told the council of Bedzil's secret meetings with the white prospectors. His lies had unraveled completely. His punishment had been severe. He was stripped of his warrior status and exiled, cast out to wander the plains alone, a man without a people. A fate, Anna thought. That was far worse than death. Nalnish had kept his word. He had acknowledged Eli's claim, and he had left them in peace. But the peace was not an empty one. Sometimes Anna would catch a glimpse of a lone rider on a distant ridge watching over the ranch. A silent guardian. Her people had not forgotten her entirely. They were simply waiting, watching, to see what this new life, this new family she was creating, would become. Thunder trotted up to the house, and Eli swung down from the saddle with the easy, familiar grace of a man who was completely at home in his own skin. At 46, he looked younger and happier than he had in years. Love, Anna had discovered, was a powerful medicine for a wounded spirit. "How are my girls today?" he asked, his voice a low, happy rumble. He came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. "Your girls are fine," Anna laughed, leaning back against his solid, comforting warmth. "Though this one grows restless." She patted her belly. "I think she will be a rider, like her father, or perhaps a warrior, like her mother." They stood together in a comfortable, easy silence, watching the sun begin its slow descent towards the distant mountains. The sky was on fire, painted in brilliant streaks of gold and crimson, the same colors that had filled Anna's world on the night Eli had first carried her into this house. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli asked quietly, his voice serious. "Leaving your people, your whole world?" Anna turned in his arms to face him. She studied the weathered, handsome face she had come to love more than breathing. She traced the faint scar above his eyebrow, a souvenir from his fight with Chayton. "How can I regret finding my home?" she whispered, and she saw the answer to her own question reflected in his loving green eyes. In the distance, a nighthawk cried out, its lonely, haunting voice carrying across the vast, silent prairie like a blessing. Somewhere out on the horizon lay the bustling town of Cheyenne, with its saloons and its railroads and its false promises of civilization. Somewhere behind them, in the mountains and the hidden valleys, lay the ghosts of who they used to be, the sorrows they had both endured. But here, in this quiet, perfect moment, under the vast Wyoming sky that had witnessed their unlikely love story, Eli Ward and the woman who had chosen to be called Anna had everything that mattered. They had each other. They had the promise of tomorrow. And they had the hard-won freedom to write their own ending. If this story stirred something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you watching from tonight? And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the untamed frontier, because everyone, everywhere, deserves a love worth fighting for.